Today we're considering the African Development Bank and Fund Bill 2018. I want to welcome Minister Darcy and your officials to the meeting. There are 5 amendments tabled, so we now move to consideration of the bill. Do you wish to make any remarks? No. Okay. So we'll go to section 1 then of the bill. Amendment 1 in the name of the Minister. 1 and 5 are related and will be discussed together.
Thank you, Chair. This amendment simply changes the short title and long title of the bill to reflect amendments 3 and 4. These are technical provisions.
Okay. Members, so section 1 as amended and stand part of the bill? Agreed. Section 2. Section 2 stand part of the bill? Agreed. Section 3. Section 3 stand part of the bill? Agreed. Agreed. Section 4. Section 4 stand part of the bill? Agreed. Section 5, Amendment 2 in the name of Deputy Eamon Ryan. It's out of order. It's not relevant to the provisions of the bill. So that Section 5 then stand part of the bill?
5, because I think the amendment that Deputy Ryan has placed down chimes with my own contribution in terms of second stage debate on this, and it was about the need for the agreement to be stronger in the context of environmental and human rights. To give a couple of examples, and the structures, the question I put, Minister, at the time was what structures were in place to monitor the human rights and due diligence of companies that would be beneficiaries of this fund, and that is still not known to us. Also, the focus that needs to be put on the issue of renewable energy technologies to help address the issues in terms of climate and the particular specific needs of African countries. So I think the amendment here, while ruled out of order, I'm not challenging that, obviously. I think that this amendment did try to capture some of these issues, and it's something I would look at report stage, but I'd appreciate a response in relation to those issues of environmental protections, human rights, and the issues around climate change.
It was a very similar question in relation to the AIIB when we passed it this time last year. On joining, as is the case with all development banks, our engagement with the African Development Bank Fund will be guided and informed Ireland's overall approach to development, including in the areas of cited by the Deputy. The current policy, One World, One Future, provides focus for Ireland's engagement in all multilateral forums and processes. As members of the committee may be aware, this policy is currently under review to ensure that our development ambition takes note of development challenges and initiatives such as Sustainable Development Goals. The new policy will have been shaped by a significant consultative process, ensuring that its vision of this world is both relevant to modern challenges and anchored in our foreign policy values, working towards a world that is more equal, peaceful and sustainable. I believe that embedding and prescribing the nature of Ireland's engagement with the bank and the fund within legislation as proposed by the amendment would restrict and limit Ireland's capacity for similar development policy evolution and coherence. In relation to the suggestion in the amendment rule out of order on reporting arrangements to Oireachtas, I'm sure the Minister will give full consideration to the views in the amendment, while not actually accepting the amendment, but it will be considered.
Okay, just like what protections are there in relation to companies that receive this money in terms of human rights? What is there from, like, this is us investing in a bank, a development bank, which is a worthy instrument in itself, as I've mentioned, but how do we monitor as a state the beneficiaries of that?
The bank has integrated safeguard systems unanimously agreed by the board of directors going back to 2013. And this is the cornerstone of the bank's strategy to promote growth that is socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable. Additionally, as highlighted by the multilateral organisation Performance Assessment Network conducted in 2016, safeguards and standards is an area where the bank is particularly strong, which facilitates the delivery of social and environmental standards and the screening of projects, for example, against gender and climate change criteria. So again, it isn't, Deputy, isn't a question of, there you go, operate as you see fit. This is pretty standard now for all of the multilateral development banks. And then in terms of One World, One Future, the achievement of gender equality, this is also an open issue which the bank and the fund place a special emphasis upon, actively seeking to address the issue across all operations.
Okay, so the question is that Section 5 stand part of the bill? Section 6, that Section 6 stand part of the bill? There's a new section then, Amendment 3, in the name of the Minister.
Yeah, Chair, Amendment 3 relates to the International Finance Corporation Act 1958. The legislation governing Ireland's engagement with International Finance Corporation, or IFC, the arm of the World Bank, which is involved in encouraging private sector development in developing countries. The amendment seeks to amend Section 1 and 2 of the Act in order to allow for changes in the International Finance Corporation's Articles of Agreement to be approved by way of Dáil resolution rather than primary legislation.
Deputies? Okay, so the new section there might be inserted. Agreed. Amendment 4 then, new section again, Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Amendment 4 relates to Section 851A of the Tax Consolidated Act 97, which provides for the basis for the confidentiality of taxpayer information. The proposed amendment seeks to allow for this information to be disclosed by the Department of Finance when authorised by the Freedom of Information Act 2014. This amendment is particularly time sensitive as it relates to an ongoing Freedom of Information case.
Deputies? So that new section being inserted? Great.
Just on that new section, what exactly will this, what limits are in relation to this, and does this now allow for all revenue data to be exchanged in this way, where there is a request?
I'll read the note, Deputy, because it's actually a very important piece. This section amendments 851A of Tax Consolidated Act 97. Section 851 provides for the basis for confidentiality of taxpayer information. It also provides for the basis for the circumstances in which such information can be disclosed by the Revenue Commissioners, including the limited circumstances in which such information can be disclosed to the Department of Finance. The proposed amendment will address a conflict between the legislative provisions of Section 851A and those of the Information Act, Freedom of Information Act, which currently prevents the Department of Finance from providing records to the Office of the Commissioner, even when it is statutorily required to do so in the context of the operation of Freedom of Information legislation. This change in law is necessitated by a specific issue which has arisen. The issue arose during the course of a review of the Freedom of Information decision by the Information Commissioner, which in part involved records which are taxpayer confidential. Under the current provisions of 851A, officials in the Department of Finance are precluded from providing these records to the Information Commissioner, as to do so would constitute a criminal offence. However, on the other hand, the Freedom of Information Act, under the Freedom of Information Act, there is a statutory requirement to furnish this information to the Information Commissioner, and failure to comply may constitute a criminal offence. This results in a highly unsatisfactory legal position with conflicting legislative provisions and prevents the Department from providing the records to the Information Commissioner as it wishes to do so. The proposed amendment to Section 851A should address this legislative conflict and remove the anomaly. It will ensure that the requisite records can be provided to the Information Commissioner so that he can conduct his review and fulfil his statutory function without further delay. I do also want to note that Department of Finance officials had initially explored the possibility of including this amendment in this year's Finance Bill. However, the Department was advised that the proposed amendment was inappropriate for inclusion in a money bill given it did not have a money bill status. It is therefore necessary to use an alternative such as this bill to bring forward this legislative amendment. Also, in this regard, Department of Finance can receive taxpayer confidential information from the Revenue Commissioners solely for specific limited purposes, namely in the context of policy formulation and in connection with state aid matters. It is important to note that any revenue officer or any person, including Department of Finance officials, to whom taxpayer information is disclosed, who knowingly provides to any person any taxpayer information or uses any taxpayer information otherwise than in course of administering or enforcing the Tax Act shall be guilty of an offence and liable to criminal sanction.
Doherty?
Ask just a couple of questions in relation to this. Do I take it now that first of all, the information is provided by the Department of Finance as opposed to an official in the Department of Finance as opposed to the Revenue Commissioners, first and foremost?
So the Department of Finance officials may have information related to the tax status of a company. So if there was a state aid case coming, the Revenue Commissioners would give information to the Department of Finance so that they're defending a position or formulating policy. It's the use of that information that is now allowed to go to the Information Commissioner.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that information would obviously have originated with the revenue officials.
So it's confidential, but it's allowed to be passed for the formulation of policy or the defence of a state aid, potentially a state aid case. It can then, because so there's a conflict. You have two pieces of legislation, one allowing it and one disallowing it. Sorry, both disallowing it, sorry. And that...
But both making it legal.
Yeah. So, and a criminal sanction in both cases.
Yeah, I understand that. And I'm not opposed to the section here.
Yeah, and just the number then effectively is Revenue Commissioners can give this information to the Information Commissioner, but Department of Finance officials can't, and this rectifies it.
Yes. Okay, well, that was my further question in terms of the Revenue Commissioners. And can I ask, just in relation to that this obviously involves the department and officials within the department having access to taxpayer information. What are the provisions set out in law in relation to officials in the department as opposed to the revenue having access to taxpayers' information, personal information?
That's
We only have in respect to policy or respect to...
only for policy can they receive information from revenue for the formulation of policy or to defend a state aid case against the state.
Okay, so they're allowed to do it only on those two. And in the case of policy, that would be, as we look for information in terms of our own formulation of policy, that allows for information only to be provided in a way where taxpayers are not identified, yes. But for the department, and I assume the minister as well, right, that he or she is entitled to that information with the individual being identifiable.
Yeah,
we can't identify individuals. We can get general information.
Okay, but the information is general and broad, but in some circumstances, the information could actually, without being told, you could identify who the company potentially is.
Okay, so just let me tease through this. So would it be right to say that in the only case where the department would have access to information on a taxpayer that could be identifiable wouldn't be in the case of policy, although you could make assumptions, but it would be identifiable in the case of state aid, yeah. and that's the situation, yeah? And heretofore, no information has ever been passed between the Department of Finance and the Information Commissioner in relation to taxpayer information. Would that be correct?
Yes, because there was a criminal offence if they did so.
Okay. Well, it was a criminal offence if they didn't as well.
I know.
Okay.
This rectifies that anomaly, that
yeah,
conflict.
But it hasn't been passed so far, and this is to allow it to be passed. Yes. And then, is this the last? Is there any restrictions on passing information to European authorities from the department official in relation?
Under state aid rules, European authorities can request the information.
From the officials?
From revenue
But
and from finance. And from finance.
from finance, okay. Okay.
Okay, so the question is that the new section be there.
Just one last question, but in relation to European access to information, particularly around the environmental legislation and all the rest for information, is there a restriction on officials providing through that forum if they use the European authorities to access information? Is there restrictions on the officials passing the information to them in a case of? It would be using the environmental. I don't have the right terminology for it, but it's data. It's access to information using a different mechanism. It's not a freedom of information mechanism, but it would be used quite frequently.
I don't know, Deputy. There are general powers.
Okay. I may just liaise specifically in relation to that, but I have no issue with this.
Okay. So does a new section be there inserted? Agreed? Agreed. Schedule 1 then, that's Schedule 1, be a schedule to the bill. Agreed? Schedule 2, that's Schedule 2, be a schedule to the bill. Agreed? Title then, Amendment 5 in the name of the Minister. Already discussed with 1, that the amendment be made.
Agreed.
Agreed. Title then, that this be the title of the bill, an act to provide for the approval of the terms of the agreement establishing the African Development Bank, to provide for the approval of terms of the agreement establishing the African Development Fund, to provide for payments under those agreements, to amend the International Finance Corporation Act 1958 and the Taxes Consolidation Act 1997, and to provide for related matters. Is that agreed? Agreed. As the bill has now completed committee stage, it is recommended that members submit report stage amendments to the Bill's office without delay, as a report stage may be tabled at short notice. So in accordance with Standing Order 90, the following message will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil. Select Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform and Taoiseach has completed its consideration of the African Development Bank and Fund Bill 2018 and has made amendments thereto and has amended the title. So that's agreed. I now propose to suspend the meeting until 3 o'clock. So thank you, Minister, and your officials for attending.
Thank you very much.
We're considering the 2018 supplementary estimate for the public services for vote 13. Office of Public Works resumed. Minister Moran, would like to make a opening statement, please.
Good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to thank this committee for the time to afford to my officials and I to provide additional detail on the papal visit requested last week. My attendance at this committee as Minister of State in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform with special responsibility for the Office of Public Works and Flood Relief proposes net supplementary estimate for 20 million. This is to cover the cost incurred by the Office of OPW for the papal visit and the estimated additional spend of 4 million on new works, alterations and additions for a number of projects, including energy works, emergency works, accelerated works, energy retrofit projects, lift replacement programmes and on Leinster House and the Department of Justice rationalisation programme. The main part of the supplementary at 18 million relates to the cost of works undertaken by the OPW on the visit of Pope Francis to Ireland. On request from the Taoiseach's office earlier this year, the OPW fully committed to provide its resource to plan and assist in the organising of this event. However, it should be noted that there were no funds allocated in the OPW within the 2018 estimates for the event of this magnitude. There was an understanding that the additional funds would be provided on completion of works by the OPW, and I am here to request that to the committee the approval of the supplementary estimate. A number of inquiries arose at last week's meeting regarding the procurement of goods and services for this event. The first thing that we need to be acknowledged is the extremely short time frame from the date the Department of Taoiseach requested the OPW to plan for this event to actually the date of the papal visit. Hence, the OPW combined tendering competitions and possible to extend the multi-year framework of a number of contractors that had been put in place together with the Office of Government Procurement a decade of centuries. All suppliers and existing framework have successfully been through the rigours of public request and tendering process and have to date fulfilled all obligations to lay out their respective contracts. At the last committee meeting, deputies were very considerate and complimentary on the excellent work carried out by the OPW event. I would like to reiterate my thanks for the hard work that the OPW put into ensuring that this event was carried out in a highly professional and effective manner. To put into perspective the magnitude of the event in the fact that it was viewed by 1.1 million viewers, 159 countries and 1,200 journalists for the event in 31 countries. We as deputies and our colleagues in government can be proud of how Ireland was portrayed nationally and internationally by this event. Hence, in my opinion, that we should support the hard work of the OPW carries out in support of government. Before I finish, I would like to remind the members that the OPW is consistently available to government to respond to these large-scale infrastructure projects and will do everything in their power to obtain value for money in carrying out their function, which is a very wide remit spanning from flood risk to estate heritage management. I conclude that I am happy to recommend the supplementary estimates for approval to this committee and to answer any questions that may arise. And I would say, Chairman, that we did circulate the questions that was put to us last week. We circulate that in answer format, and I've also circulated the figures that was required coming from the committee. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to that.
Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, just first of all note, thanks a lot, Minister, but the information did come in very late. Unfortunately, we just got this stuff a couple of hours ago, and then we literally just got the more detailed information after last week's meeting. Can I just confirm that the 16.7 million we're talking about now, plus another 800,000 was mentioned last week, 17.5 million. That money is not for things that would be usual for like a state visit by a head of state in terms of, you know, Gardaí in front and behind the car and that kind of thing. These relate, at least overwhelmingly, to the Mass in Phoenix Park, event management, stewarding, logistics relating to that. That's the case, is it?
Yes.
If a concert organiser were to organise a concert in Phoenix Park, as I understand there is or has been a concert by Ed Sheeran in Phoenix Park, who would pay for those equivalent things? Who would pay for stewarding, event management, logistics? Would the state pay for that?
No, but I would point out to the areas that you said in relation to the money that is in here is not just for Phoenix Park. It's to do with Knock, Phoenix Park, Crow Park, and also what took place on the streets in Dublin on the Papal's visit. Okay. In relation to concerts in relation, that's all. I think all concerts programmed into the ticketing, and the cost in relation to the ticketing that's what's put onto the people will actually pay for the event and the stewarding the company.
Yeah, because they're private events organised by private organisers. But for example, I mean, the event in Phoenix Park, that was a private event. It was obviously open ticketing. It was free to get a ticket, but it was a private event organised by the Catholic Church. Why is it appropriate for the state to spend close to 18 million euros of public money on a private church event? In any case, not even to mention the very substantial amount of monies that is owed by the Church to the state.
Yeah, I totally disagree with you. This visit of Pope Francis, if you're thinking back in '79, when the previous Pope arranged, the state got very much involved in delivering that for the people of Ireland. The people of Ireland that looked in relation to the Pope and the gathering of families. We work closely, as we have done in the past, and we continue to work in relation to working with to make sure that the people of Ireland that turn up and come to this event, that everything is properly in place in terms of security, safety, and all the works that's combined with that. But I think the state, in terms of the people of Ireland that looked in relation to the Pope's event, looked for the people to visit Ireland, and we stepped up to the mark as requested by Taoiseach and by the whole of government approach to make this visit worthwhile and showcase Ireland abroad.
You think it's a good use of public money, for example, that the public spent 1 million euros on stewarding alone for what was a private Catholic Church event? Do you think that's an appropriate use of public money?
First of all, when the tickets went up online, 500,000 people applied for those tickets. And once those 500,000 was applied, we, as the OPW, took on the task of running the event. We had to set out, there was a management plan put in place. We then set out how we run that event. Security is vital importance to the people of this country. In that event, or any event that we host, but we have to make sure that the stewards in there, there's two different types of stewarding in relation to it, one outside and one inside. The people inside took care of what's on, the people on the outside took care of what took place in the street. But the most important thing is that we looked after the safety of the people that was attending the papal visit.
I mean, there's another 600,000 down here, again, actually, for stewarding, so a total of 1.6 million. And to be clear, that the state isn't going to go looking for any of these costs of event management, of infrastructure, of camera platforms, of CCTVs, of temporary toilets, of stewarding, etc. The state isn't going to go looking for the Catholic Church, the organisers of these events, to pay for any of these things.
It's under the state management plan in relation to how we run events like that, and we have to oblige and work with those plans. Deputy, this is not something that just happens. There's an awful lot of organisers, 1,200 pages of a management plan put in place to make this event. We have to adhere to that through the Gardaí, to the fire service, to the local authorities, to all the different agencies that's connected to that, through the HSE, all those different bodies attached to that. We make sure and work with them. That's part of the plan. And don't forget, everyone talked about the Pope coming towards the end of last year. We only got official notice that prior to him coming. I think it was in February we got it. And the amount of work that had to take place in that short period of time, we have to do it and do it perfectly. And there was no anything happened in relation to that. There was no unseen events or no unseen injuries or anything like that that took place inside in the Phoenix Park that we couldn't control. It was very well run.
Just to be clear, I'm not questioning at all the quality of the work done by the OPW, the event management, etc. I'm not questioning that. What I'm questioning is the fact that it seems that the public is being asked, and I will say no on the vote, and we'll see how it goes, but the public is being asked to pay €100 towards the event management for each person that went to these events around the country, if you do the figures. The public would not do that for a similar private event by something else, by a political organisation, by a social movement, by a concert organiser, by a football match. In all those cases, those major events would be covered by those private organisations. And so I think it raises a very fundamental question about the relationship of church and state, whereby the public, which is made up of Catholics and non-Catholics, and everybody has their absolute right to practice their own religion, but that public en masse is being asked to pay for a private religious event of one private religion, which in this case is the Catholic Church. It seems to me completely at odds with any notion of a secular society, of separation of church and state.
Well, we were requested by the Taoiseach in relation to holding the event, and there was also estimated 500,000 people would attend that event, and we done, as the OPW done, with everything in place, with management plans to make sure that event. It's definitely, I'm not getting drawn into church versus the state or anything like that. My job as minister was requested by the Taoiseach, and that's what I done.
One final question: do you know if or how much the church contributed to the organisation of these events in various guises, World Meeting of Families, etc.?
At this time, I'm not up to scratch with that in terms of the cost.
Do we have any idea at all?
I'll get it for you, Deputy, and send it on to you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Deputy Murphy. Just in relation to the additional information that we received, you might just go down through it with me, please. On page 1, like the different headings, Activo, procurement, yes, procurement type, contract. What's that mean?
Sorry, where's that, Judy?
Sorry,
Sorry, what's the question there, Chairman?
The procurement, there was procurement apparently, 4.9 million, and the procurement type contract. How does that, what is that?
I'll ask Chairman Pearse Doherty to answer that.
Yeah, to explain the procurement for all of the contractors, including Actavo, we used a combination of existing framework contracts and procurement, an individual procurement where time allowed. There were 15 different headings involved, and reviewed the procurement timetable with the Department of the Taoiseach, with the OGP, the Attorney General's Office, and decided the appropriate to 13 of the 15 areas of activity were procured under existing framework contracts. So the suppliers had already gone through the checks and balances of public procurement. And in 2 cases, an additional procurement competition was run very, very tightly for the time involved. That was CCTV and security. In the case of Actavo, for the camera platform, media rises, trackway, and a lot of the fencing on both sites, we already had a framework contract in place, so we would have contracted the work out under the terms of that framework contract.
What date was that framework contract in place?
I might be able to give you that now in 1 second.
2015.
2015, my colleague, yeah. Well, I have it on 19th of February 2016, actually.
Sorry.
So it's a contract running from 19th of February 2016 to 19th of February 2020. We were very fortunate in that because the OPW is centrally involved in a lot of the decade of centenary commemorations, we had put in place quite a number of framework contracts for a succession of events, and they allowed us to deal with these items. And what we did...
Of 4.9 million was spent on the basis of a framework contract that dated 19th of the 2nd, 2016.
Yeah, correct.
And the next one then, it says procurement, yes, and it says framework. What's the difference? What's the framework?
I think that would be just a technical difference. Both of those would be under different frameworks. So
I gather that. The first one is a contract. The framework is dated 2016. So here we were spending 2.021 million, and it said framework. So that was that a separate framework for those suppliers, or was it this framework of 2016?
This was a separate framework.
So it was a 2018 framework?
No, this framework here was for the provision of health and safety services for OPW facilities and events management unit, dating from the 17th December 2015 and running until 16th December 2019.
For the expenditure of 2.021 million, it was the 17th of December 15.
Correct.
Correct. Then you had multiple suppliers then for all sorts of things, and it says procurement various. So again, you know, what was the method used to employ these various contractors at a cost of 1.881 million?
A lot of the smaller contractors, we would use the procurement method best available to us case by case. So some of these items would have been covered by framework contracts. Some of these items would have been under existing contractual relationships running. There was no time, Deputy, to do individual procurement. So our focus was to make sure that the prices being quoted and charged to OPW stood up to scrutiny and had been checked and vetted to public procurement standards in recent times.
2015-2016 type framework.
Yeah, it would have been quite a number of different frameworks.
Would the date back that far? I mean, this was 2018. So you go back to 2016 for one framework, you go back to 2015 for another framework.
Yep.
So is it back that far again? 2015, 2016.
Quite a few of them would be. They're four-year frameworks, so, and as I say, a lot of them are put in place in relation to the centenary commemorations, which obviously enough was very focused around 2016.
And then you go on to the next one, which is 1.207 million. And it's a contract again.
Yep.
I just want to get the date of the frameworks that you're using.
Yeah, this one for the CCTV services was an individual contract for the papal visit.
Yeah, but how was
So-
it?
This was one of the two procurements that were done,
So it's 2015,
specific procurements for the visit.
Yeah, but my point is, was it a real-time procurement process, or was it a framework process?
This one and also the security services were real-time procurement processes.
And if any would have bid for that then?
I don't have that information to hand. I don't have that information to hand. I'll have to come back to you with that.
Okay. The next one then, Aventus. Procurement again, but what kind of contract?
Shall I take that, Minister? Yeah. Events is,
What kind of contract was it?
that was a
Again,
frame.
was it a real-time?
This was a framework contract running from the 19th of February 2016 until the 19th of February 2020.
Okay. Pulse Security, €1 million for stewards.
Pulse Security was an individual tender for the papal visit. So as you described, a real-time
So
tender.
how many would have tendered for that? How many companies would have tendered for that?
Again, there now three companies, and my colleague tells me 3 companies tendered for that procurement.
ETAV, ETAV. These are electrical services. Again, it's a contract. How many tenders did you get for, or was it one of these frameworks?
Framework, again, Deputy.
2015.
This time running from the 29th of January 2016 to the 28th of January 2020. Electrical
Next one,
services.
Logistics site management and signage. 801,000. It's a framework.
Yeah, this is a framework again. So 26th of February 2016, so again from 2016. And I should point out a lot of these contractors then would use multiple subcontractors. There's a point raised the last day. I see about 10 subcontractors in that particular case.
Oh, in this one. So one contractor would have got the job at 647,000.
Yeah.
There was a number, he subbed it out there.
Yeah.
Or he or she.
Yeah. And the
that
same with the
framework
bigger
again,
amounts there, Deputy. Actavo and Uba, they would have been multiple subcontractors. There was a question raised last week whether small suppliers and Irish suppliers had their fair share, and they did. They would have worked as subcontractors for the bigger companies. And we checked that the concessions in the Phoenix Park took on as much work as they were comfortable in taking on through these various contract arrangements, but a lot of them are small companies, and they had only so much that they were capable of taking on at the time.
So with Aylesbury, was that just a framework again?
Aylesbury was a framework for the provision of cleaning services,
2016
to 2020.
And Eventsec, is that framework?
Eventsec is another direct procurement for the visit.
On the day?
On the day.
Real-time sort of.
And you're probably going to ask me how many tendered?
3, 10.
3, I'm told again.
3. And then CFA Construction Limited, 344,000. They were procured by structural engineer.
Yeah, That is for the roadworks and so on in the park, so that would have been a subcontract to structural engineering works there.
That's what it says, but how many, was there a tender process? Was it under a framework?
As I understand it, that is a framework. There would have been and multiple different suppliers that we would use for civil engineering like that, but I can check that for you.
Okay. Then Ion then, solutions. Contract. Was it a framework? Contract. Money tendered.
Chairman.
Tendered.
Only 6 or 7 contractors.
PJ Hegarty's existing framework, $250,000, so that's 2016 again.
That would be a general framework contract that we use for a lot of building maintenance, so that's a wider contract. And I think actually the civil engineering works that you were asking about earlier also falls into, so framework contracts here we're looking for at events linked into 2016 or state visits, but the OPW, because we do maintenance of all state buildings, would also have another range of procured services for the maintenance function, and in some cases we're able to lean on that.
Yes. When was that existing framework put in place?
Recently renewed.
That was 4 years ago and renewed just this year.
So 2014.
2014, yeah.
First we can. Arcana then, administers staff, 100,000, framework again.
That's a
2016.
framework, yeah. And again, similar time period, 2016 to 2020.
Yeah, the next then is painting of railings, procured by BMS.
OPW. BMS is Building Management Services, which is, again,
OPW.
it's part of the OPW. It's one of our maintenance contracting.
Was that a tender?
Yeah, would have been a tendered amount.
How many would have tendered that? Many?
3.
Approximately 3 suppliers tendered for that.
And then the banqueting food systems, 76,000. Contract.
That would have been. Yeah, that's from framework contracts, but the specific contract for that, seven companies competed.
Just critical healthcare then, 66,000 HSE framework. So presumably they did that. And then Conex developers, roadworks at Papal Cross, 61,000.
Again, that would have been similar to the other roadworks. My colleagues have explained to me here, we would have used our existing OPW maintenance contractors there for those civil engineering works.
And then you still have €1.3 million to pay out. You haven't got invoices for these, is that right?
Yeah. And I would say we have more to pay out, and we have internal costs that need to be allocated to the papal visit. But that is an up-to-date status of the costs.
Deputy O'Brien.
Apologies for missing the start. So you had been through a couple of ones at the start. Can I just ask in relation to the third one? It says multiple suppliers. I presume that none of those are relisted then again, no? Like, for instance, multiple suppliers, and it contains Walks to Phoenix Park gates, and then there's another one below for PJ Hegarty and Sons, Walks to Phoenix Park gates. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about 2 separate suppliers.
They're only counted once.
They're only counted once.
Yeah.
Okay, so what works would have had to be carried out to the Phoenix Park gates twice in relation to the papal visit?
Back, as we know, when the Pope visited in relation to the management and the control of the event it was required of us to take down the gates at Phoenix Park. We'd taken down the gates. We also had to make temporary gates to put them back up in relation to that. In light of the Pope then arriving for crowd control, the temporary gates again had to be taken down, and again when the event was over the gates had to be put up. That will give you the cost of the 200 and something thousand in relation to that. In relation to, well, that's the question you asked, and that's the answer, Deputy.
Yeah. And in relation to the stewards are listed twice for 1.64 million.
As you can imagine, Deputy, to get a company that can to give enough stewards to do an event such as that, it was broken up to 2 different stewarding companies applied without contract, and they got it. So in terms of the stewards, there was 2 different sets posed an event. One was for outside, and one is stewards, group of stewards outside, and one was inside. But it also took into account of what you did, the other areas where the Pope visited as well.
How many? Do we have any idea of how many personnel we were talking about in terms of how many stewards?
2,916.
2,916 in total, inside and outside.
Yeah.
That was for the 3-day visit.
Sorry?
Was that for the whole 3 days?
Yeah.
Okay. Might come back in, Chair. It's going to do some.
That includes knock and all the other areas as well.
Okay.
Just go back to the outstanding invoices again. These are outstanding because are the companies slow on putting them in? Is there an issue with the? Is there an issue with the cost?
Well,
waiting invoices and quarters.
A combination of both, Chairman. So there's a number of steps. First of all, the procurement in advance to make sure that the agreed rates are correct and acceptable and meet procurement. But then when the invoice is lodged, we check the invoice against the work done. And some of this is quite complicated, and because there's so much detail involved, as you can see from figures like 2,900 stewards. So there would be many queries and many checks and cross-checks until we're satisfied that the invoice can be paid. And in some cases, you're dealing with multiple small suppliers, so the main contractor can't invoice the OPW until they, in turn, are invoiced by multiple small people. Some of them are voluntary organisations, so it can take a bit of time. So that's why there's quite a few outstanding. And I would say there are still quite a few invoices outstanding. The visit was the 26th of August, and even though it's now early December, we will get quite a significant number of invoices over the next week or two.
Some of those invoices, there's 1.3 million outstanding.
Yeah. Well, there are invoices that we know about that are still being cleared and haven't been paid yet, haven't been processed for payment, haven't been cleared for payment.
There might be others?
Yes, yeah. But it's a moving feast that obviously as every week goes by we're honing in the figure, and we believe the overall total of 18 million is correct, and the cost will not exceed 18 million for the total visit against an initial estimate of 20 million.
Deputy O'Brien asked about the gates, and there was some discussion about it here the last day. I think there was 3 figures mentioned on the last day. So we have one figure here, which you have explained to Deputy O'Brien, 244,000. So that's for taking down the gates and putting up temporary gates. So what are the other figures related to these gates?
There is another estimated cost, Chair, which is 700,000, and that again is, first of all, we've took out to tender in relation to gates, and this doesn't come about just send out a tendering. There was different people involved in terms of from Heritage, from different departments involved in terms of how we go about. These are a protected structure. They're part of the park, and in order to go out and get those gates and get them proper put in place, the money to be spent on them, it doesn't just occur of repainting the gates and putting them back up. It goes along with different that. In terms of taking down the gates originally, about some stonework, some pillars had to be removed. They have to be rebuilt, put in place. Steelwork has to be in place. We have also to incur costs in relation to Tarmacadam in terms of archaeologists have to be involved because we're interfering with the roadworks and everything in order to put these gates back up in place. And we also put into the cost of that is all those, if you put a collective of those things that has to be done to put these gates back to where they belong and to make sure that, as you know yourself, Chair, that park has won awards and gold medals recently, and it's vital to the people of Ireland. It's hugely important to those people, and we have an opportunity in relation to doing those gates now and bring them back, put them into use that will do for centuries to go forward.
Yeah, so the two figures that we have, as I said, for clarification, 244,025 to take down the gates and to put up temporary gates. The 700,000 then is for...
Sorry, take down the gates, put up temporary gates.
Yes.
Take down the temporary gates and put them back up when the papal visit was over.
Okay.
Then the other cost is 700,000, mean the gates that go out to tender in relation to getting them sprayed, done up, getting them back to their original
These
use.
are the original
Use. On top of that then, there'll be other cost, as I said to you, with steelwork, stonework, pillaring, tarmacadam. Those necessary works are required in relation to the gates.
I understand that, but the 700,000, that's included in this estimate, is it? We spoke of this last week.
Yes, sorry,
It's
yes.
included in this estimate. Is there any other figure in the, it says here, Conservation Architects, gate works, you're awaiting an invoice for 6,150.
Yeah.
So that's for what, exactly? It's for the architects who maybe...
Supervised work.
Supervised
works.
Okay. Is there any other estimate in here relating to gates?
No.
So that's 244,000, 700,000 and 6,150. Deputy O'Brien, did you want to come back in?
If I could just go back to the stewards, and I've just got this one. If I go to the Pulse Security, which was the higher figure, I think, for just over $1 million, it gives us a breakdown of all of the areas where they provided security. So you have Dublin Castle, the Papal Route, the Pro Cathedral, the Capuchin Day Centre, Knock. They weren't involved in the Phoenix Park event, according to this. Car parks. And then there's two there that you might just be able to explain. One is the combined services.
For outside Phoenix Park.
They were outside Phoenix
Yeah.
Park. But it says Phoenix Park event 0.
EventSec were provided to servers inside Phoenix Park.
Okay, so when we look at Phoenix Park event, we're talking about the inside event. We're not talking about outside.
We're doing stewarding externally as well as internally, but it's a combined of all.
Okay, the question I'm trying to get to is how much was the security for the day of the Phoenix Park event if they were providing security outside? I have all the others. I have Dublin Castle, Pro Cathedral. There is two figures there then. There's one is just security and there's one combined services and it's just over 600,000. I'm just wondering if we could get a further breakdown of exactly where that 600,000 was spent.
630,000.
Yeah. And where was that spent?
Inside Phoenix Park.
Inside Phoenix Park?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would have been, is that in relation to Pulse Security? Because it's down here as Pulse Security, 1,005,270.
Different company.
What do you mean it's a different company?
It's events.
Okay.
There's two different companies, Stuart, Deputy.
Okay, so we have this one here, which is the list to spend to date, Minister. And I just need to clear it up for myself, right? And we have Pulse Security Stewards 1,570. It was a tender, as far as I'm aware, because I think you said it was a tender. And then we have the contract procurement information, and the company is Pulse Security, the contract reference number, and the total is 1,005,200. I think there's 21 cents in the difference between the two documentations. It says here, Phoenix Park event 0. So when I asked the question, you said it was for outside, and then when you just came back in, you said it's for inside. So I'm just trying to get a breakdown of exactly how much Pulse Security spent on the Phoenix Park event. Because I have figures for everywhere else that they were.
Yeah, so we'll have to break down then. The Pulse Security would certainly have been working on the Sunday, the 26th, when the Phoenix Park Mass was taking place, on the roads outside and managing people. So what we'll have to break down for you is, of the total of 1 million, just over 1 million, which would have included Knock, which would have included Dublin Castle Saturday morning, the papal visit in Dublin Saturday afternoon, and the outside event on Sunday. I don't think we have that figure to hand, or do we?
We have the figure for Dublin Castle. We have the figure for Dublin Castle. We have the figure for the papal route. We have Pro Cathedral, the Capuchin Day Centre. We have Knock. We have the car parks.
Yep.
And then there's two other figures, which one is combined services for 387,000, and the other one is the subgroup, security, which is for 246,000. I'm just looking for some more detail on those two figures, because, and the reason I'm looking for it is because we know that they subcontracted some of the security out to G4S.
Okay. My colleague is going to try and get that figure for you now.
Okay.
Perhaps, Chairman, if we could come back to that point.
And yeah, I'm happy to come back to it if you can get the information.
Okay, so just flag that and we can come back and have it.
Yeah.
Deputy Murphy?
Well, apologies, I was a bit late coming in because I was tied up with another meeting. You may have answered these already, ministerial officials. I did ask questions the last day about the events coordinator. There was two positions there. Did we get some clarification on that? How much it cost?
Yeah. Commissioner McMahon.
Deputy, there was 4 event managers, and 3 of them were on site, and 1 of them was in Dublin Castle. And then there was 3 event coordinators. I know it's a little bit confused, the terminology. The event coordination was handled by the OPW and the event management unit under my colleague Des Swords and Alicia Norton. So it really was. It depended on the locations, Deputy. So we had event controllers, because site-located event controllers, and then coordinating their activities, we had event coordinators. So there was a combined effort of 7 different parties, if I can put it that way, but overseen by the OPW's event management control unit.
Okay, and I understand you have to have those people when you're expecting big crowds, and you can't leave anything to chance. I just want to query just one other figure again for clarification. Training course for crowd safety, €10,000. Again, I presume you have to do that type of thing in the lead up to event. Was it a private company carried that out?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay.
Again, we'll confirm that absolutely, Deputy. But
And what would have been involved there? Half a day, 2 days?
Again, I'll have to come back to you, Deputy, on the specifics of that. But again, it would be unlike there were volunteers stewarding on the day, which would have been provided by the church and others, and they largely would have been untrained in certain skills of crowd control, maybe health and safety aspects. The stewarding that we would have engaged, we would have insisted upon a level of capacity and a level of competence. And I think there would have been training necessary to get those who weren't up to the right under the required competence to have that competence.
Okay, and I see you have answered the question I had the last day in relation to the ATM hire.
Yeah. There was no site coverage for the local providers, so it was necessary to have cash payment at a number of the tills, and anticipating that might be an issue, ATMs were provided to allow people attending to acquire cash if they needed it to pay for food and beverage.
And basically, in relation to most of the other services, was it all carried out by Actavo?
No, though there was a multiplicity of services provided. Even those that were provided by Actavo, there was a subcontracting arrangement under Actavo. So they engaged, I think, over 60 subcontractors who were working under the Actavo umbrella, but would have been engaged by Actavo. All told, there were about 330 individual contractors working on the events. So while the headline figures might seem high, very high, the Actavo at 5 million plus, beneath that there is a large number of subcontractors who are engaged by Actavo.
That's all I want to clarify now. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Sorry, Mr.
I'm just going through this. So the EventSec security contract for 635 was only for inside Phoenix Park. They did nothing else, only inside. And what's the name? Pulse did outside. But if you could still come back with those figures, if you have them, just in relation to the overall cost, is it fair to say that it's going to cost more than the 18 million? Because obviously there was,
No.
maybe not to your department, Minister, but in general, is it going to cost more than 18 million? I mean, obviously there's a Garda bill.
Yes, there will be other additional costs in relation to that.
So there's a Garda bill which the Department of Justice is going to have to come up with from. So, and maybe this is an unfair question, Sharon. If it is, you can pull me on it. What's the overall total cost for the papal visit? So across all departments.
I wouldn't be in a position to give you that answer based on what we have in relation to the cost of the OPW, and that's what we're looking for.
So 18 million is just for the OPW bill?
Yeah.
And then, just to come back to Brian's question, other costs, you mentioned, for example, the extra guards, or Deputy Burton mentioned the army personnel. Is that paid for by year? That come out of their own budget?
First of all, Chairman, that we applied got stewards in. We also had volunteers in. The guards themselves, we hadn't enough numbers in terms of the volunteers, but the guards themselves brought in the army on the request of the Gardaí. That's why the army was in place that day.
Yeah, but who pays them? Is just what I'm asking. The other way you'd hear of police being paid for extra.
The Department of Defence.
Right, and that's all separate. That's not billed back to your cost centre.
No.
So the guards or the Department of Defence is all separate.
Yeah.
So
there was 500.
I think the point that Deputy O'Brien was making was that it's 18 million, plus. Is that the point? Yeah.
Have to come up with.
And when you see those costs, are you informed about the costs? Or
No.
You're not. Okay. Is there any further questions?
Yes, Chairman. Who operated the ATMs? Was there two banks? Were there, or who?
Well, Deputy, in relation to, because I've done my own bit of work in relation to this, in terms of most concerts and most things that happen, these ATMs are brought in and they're paid by whatever company in terms of running them. But there was, Seneca was one company to provide it, and Power Solutions was the other.
That's provided, and I accept
Yeah.
that. But who operated them? Was there a bank or banks involved?
Companies, wherever they get the cash and the machines is there.
They do the whole lot.
They provide it. We have to provide a service. If you
Yeah.
know, Deputy, most people travel around with debit
Oh, no,
cards now. They don't carry cash.
I'm not questioning that at all. I know you have to have the service, but I was just curious to know. Thank you, Chairman.
In your opening statement, Minister, you went through the OPW, and we understand, as we had an explanation last week in relation to the Leinster House spend.
Yeah.
And then you say that, and the Department of Justice rationalisation programme. What's that?
The Department of Justice was 1.5 million to the rationalisation programme, and the OPW in relation to restoring it is 2.5 million.
But what does the 1.5 million, what's that going to be spent on?
I'll ask Commissioner McMahon in relation to answer that.
Just consult my note, Chairman. The rationalisation of the accommodation in the department was required as a result of a lease expiry in 94 St Stephen's Green, where the department was compelled to move. The project involved the relocation of staff across 3 properties while maintaining business as usual. The project required multiple staff moves as a result of the complexity of phasing of works. In addition, out-of-hours work added to the project cost. The provision of a high-security, secure file storage area was not included in the original brief and was subsequently included. And fire integrity upgrade was also required in one of the properties. So it was really, I suppose, to sum it up, it was the costs incurred in moving the department from a property where a lease was being surrendered into other property.
Okay. And then in the other paperwork we received, there was the flood risk management 2018, excuse me, 2018 estimate. Is that part of this?
No. Yeah, but the 4 million is set up in relation to Leinster House and
Just Leinster House?
Justice, yeah.
So there's no supplementary estimate for flooding?
No. I'm spending a lot of money, but I'd like to spend more, all right.
The supplementary estimate 2018, row 13. It talks about flood risk management.
No, Chair, it isn't. It's not part of the supplementary.
Okay. Oh, I'm looking at the 2018 estimate and then the actual outturn. So the balance between both, or the difference between both, is included in this supplementary. So therefore, in estate management, for example, you have a greater outturn than what was estimated. So what do you put that down to?
The supplementary estimate page there, in terms of it, there's 22 million being sought. There's nothing being sought on the flood risk management side. So the revised estimate template then is just comparing last year 17 with 18.
So some of these have nothing to do with today's meeting?
No.
They're just part of information
Exactly.
that was given. Right. If there's no other questions, then
Information I asked for, Chair, and they can come back after the meeting if they want. Just on
No, we have.
Okay, you have them there.
Criminals, yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll take that. For Pulse Security, again, total cost of 1 million, covering all of the events and doing the security on the Sunday outside of the Phoenix Park. The total cost, as we said, was just over 1 million, and for the Phoenix Park proportion on the Sunday, it was just under 200,000, Deputy.
Then we get the page up. So
they relate to these two figures here, where you have payment to contractors 1.005 million, and then you have a second one of 635,347, which gives you an overall amount of 1.64 million.
They're two different stewarding companies.
Yeah.
So, as I said, Eventsec,
Deputy O'Brien.
maybe if I might explain it, one of the companies, Eventsec, costing 655,000, dealt with security within the Phoenix Park only. And Pulse Security, the larger amount, just over €1 million, dealt with NOC, dealt with the events on the Saturday, Dublin Castle, the events around Dublin City, and on the Sunday of the Papal Mass in the Phoenix Park, it dealt with security outside of the Phoenix Park, in other words, crowd management around the city for traffic. Yeah, and the proportion of the 1 million that related to that was just under €200,000.
Okay, so here's the follow-up question. We now have the figure for Dublin Castle, Paper Route, Pro Cathedral, Capuchin Day Centre, Knock. The Phoenix Park event, I'm going to put down as 200,000 because it was outside. Car parks, I'm presuming that's car parks just around Phoenix Park, outside again.
And in Knock,
okay.
Knock was actually quite
And then
difficult to organise a car
There
park.
is two figures which I was looking for the information on. I know now that 200,000 of that is in relation to the Sunday, right? There's a combined services figure of 387,000 and a security of 246,000. So when you add that up, whatever it was, to 630 odd, I think it was. We now know 200,000 of that was in relation to the Sunday event. So what's the other 400,000 in relation to? That's the figure I'm trying to get a breakdown of, those two combined figures.
The non-Sunday stuff.
It'd be the non-Sunday stuff.
Sunday.
Non-Sunday where?
Well, other events took place, like Saturday night in Croke Park, what took place in the streets in Dublin and relative to the Papal's visit.
Right, so they're just not listed as individual events.
Yeah.
So we spent 400,000 on stewarding on Croke Park.
No, we weren't involved in Croke Park.
We weren't involved.
Okay. So where did the 400,000 get spent, Minister?
From the Papal route.
But we have a separate figure here already for the paper route of 73,000.
I'm not sure what document you're reading from. Is it from the details from the last meeting?
This one?
Yes.
It's there. It doesn't say what page, but it's about halfway through it. It's the contract, procurement information and overall cost, company pulse security. And it gives us a list of the subcontractors. There was two, G4S and Secura Group. And then it gives us a breakdown of the costs, which is the 1,006,000, which is tallying up with the overall figure. And it gives us a breakdown of where all the money was spent at the different events, except for the combined services and security. I'm trying to find out what those figures relate to. I now know 200,000 is for the outside event on the Sunday, but that still leaves us 400,000.
Deputy, if it helps, we'll write back to you with a full detailed list in relation. I just don't have that figure that you required there from me.
If you can write back to the committee, so we'll all have the
all right.
Okay.
What's the total of that figure?
Total is 387. 1 second now. It's,
387,000.
and 114 plus the 246. So it's.
You're looking for an explanation of both of those figures.
And I know that 200,000 now, I've gotten 200,000 of it, but I don't know where the other 400,000 is.
Right, yeah. Provide that, right.
Yep.
So there's roughly 400,000 then that you're requiring information on.
Yeah, it's 433,000.
Okay. Is there any other questions from members?
No.
Okay, well, just to say, Minister, we went through it in detail today and on the last occasion, and I think you'll see from the engagement with the members that quite a significant amount of information was not provided in a way that was clearly understood in the first meeting. And even to go back to Deputy O'Brien, to accept, we have to accept that you will write into us and explain the 400,000. But in fact, that should have been dealt with as part of the estimate. And I'm saying that to your colleagues as much as I'm saying it to you. Because on another occasion, if that were to happen, well then we might ask that we would not deal with the estimate on the day that we have it, and that we would come back again. I just believe in having all of the figures here, but on this occasion we spent 2 meetings at it, and I certainly would not be satisfied that all of the information was here, and I'd ask you to reply to the committee on that as soon as possible, and to note that in future we'll expect all information to be provided early on, previous to the meeting itself. I raised the issue with you about Durrow Abbey last week. I want to put on record that I had a meeting with the Minister, a casual meeting, where we spoke about it, and I spoke to Mr. Buckley. I'm not going to go into it here because I'm going to leave it for another day. I'm going to ask the members for their view as to how it should be handled. But in the meantime, I'm asking again for all of the information relative to that issue, giving us the dates, times, facts, figures and the whole lot, dating back to the time when this was firstly discussed with Arts for Peace project. And I intend to suggest to the members when I get that information that we should have a special meeting with yourselves and to include Minister now, Canny, who was then a minister in the department with you. And I want to put on record that I attended meetings with the OPW and officials, and it was my understanding that we were discussing the surrender of the lease of Durrow Abbey back to the state for a figure, and that at one stage with Deputy Canny and the officials €600,000 was mentioned. So there are a number of issues that need to be sorted, but they can only be sorted by the provision of the full documentation to this committee so that we can examine exactly what's happening and understand all round what the position is from both sides of the argument, if you like.
Chairman, you're well aware, Maureen, that there's High Court proceedings in relation to this and papers are pending, and it'd be wrong of me or wrong of anybody to start to investigate that when legal action is being pursued. And I think it would be unfair for me to make any more statement in relation to it until the outcome of that is proceeded. I think it's only right and only fair.
Well, I'm going to suggest, Minister, that you have an obligation to protect taxpayers' money, and that the proceeding to court, as I explained to Mr. Buckley, is a step beyond common sense for both parties. Mediation was suggested. There have been a number of issues right along the course of this particular matter, and I don't accept that hiding behind the threat of a High Court action is sufficient. I think that the Department need to give itself time to examine the documents that are there and to reach their conclusion. But based on the fact that a commitment was given and that discussions were entered into by the then Minister Canny, I can assure you that I will come back to this at a future date, and I'm asking again for the history of this to be provided to the members so that they can make up their own minds as to what should be done.
Well, Chairman, as I previously stated, this is a matter subject to the High Court, and I won't be saying anything further on it.
I'm asking, Minister, that you provide the information to the members here on the history to it. That doesn't affect a court case.
I'm sorry, Chair, it can affect the outcome. It can.
So are you refusing to give the committee the information?
No, I'll discuss it with my team, I think. And Chair, in fairness to you, you did raise me a year ago and you said we'd done nothing. I did oblige at that time to you to meet that person, and a date I went down your neck, though she wasn't available.
It didn't suit.
Since then, I've asked my official to go through the documentation, I think, and the best legal advice I have at this present time is I set out to you that there is document pleaded with the High Court, and I have to adhere to that as well. And you can understand, Chairman, where I stand.
I can understand, Minister,
you're saying to me in relation to the taxpayer, well, I also have a duty to the taxpayer.
Yeah. And I'm asking that the committee be furnished with not the detail of a court case, nothing else, but the generalities of what we're talking about. That doesn't, you're not prohibited from sharing that information.
I'm sorry, Chair, the advice that's been given me is the legal advice. What I am here to, I can't do that pending on the High Court against my...
So what you're intending to do is to go to court, backed by taxpayers' money?
I'm on the legal advice, Chairman. I am not saying any further thing in relation to that. I'm sorry.
Well, Minister, I'm going to let it go at that. I can assure you, you haven't heard the end of it.
Well,
and I can also assure you that the commitments given by the OPW and by Minister Canny at the time, and 2 other ministers, will be well ventilated, and it will not be a pretty sight for the OPW.
Well, Chairman, I'm not in relation to the Abbey, but I am stating to you the advice I have, and as you're going with your advice, I'm going with the advice
No,
that's available
I'm not
to me.
having any advice. I just want to inform the committee of the House.
What
That's
previous ministers done is nothing to do. I'm going with the advice that's available to me. Sorry.
That's grand, yeah. But I'm reiterating the fact that this is not the end of it, and it's typical of the OPW.
No,
So,
Chair, I disagree with you. The OPW
I know you
do a
do,
very
yeah,
efficient
because you've
work.
been well briefed
We
since
work-
our last meeting, Minister, and you know damn well that you're wrong.
No,
And I have every intention of pursuing the case to the very end, because I believe that the person in question, or project in question, was misled. And all I've asked for is clarification on all of those issues. OK, you can hide behind your legal advice and say that you're going to court and all the rest of it. Fine. It will now be for the other party to decide where best to go with this. And I'm simply saying that you can get legal advice, but you can judge for yourself as to whether it's correct or not in the interest of the taxpayer. And we're going to leave it at that.
But Chairman, you said the last time, you're getting excited now. I'm giving you my side. I accept your side.
No, Minister, I'm not excited.
Sorry, this is an agenda that you've raised on a number of cases prior to me coming into this job. There's papers issued. I'm going with the advice again. So I would say to you, let that person, whoever it may be, to bring the go further with it. And I have met with Offaly County Council. I've met with different various groups in relation to it, and I'm quite happy to let it go in relation to what I said to you. I'm making no
That's
more
fine, but
further
let me be clear about it, Minister. I'm not getting excited about it. I'm not getting excited about it at all. But I have every intention of getting to the truth at the bottom of this. And that's why I asked for the general paperwork to inform us as to what the case is. So I will get to the bottom of it without getting excited at all.
I don't get excited, but thanks.
I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about me.
I just let you know I don't either.
And maybe when you're before the committee again with estimates, we'll be able to deal with the matter further. So we'll now consider the estimate and we'll inform the 413 is the estimate, and we'll send a message to that effect to the Clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Order 90. And under Standing Order 89.2, the message is deemed to be the report of the committee. Agreed? Agreed. The meeting is now concluded. Thank you, Minister, and your officials. And we will resume our business at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning.